Happy Wednesday, Penn State fans. It's the final Wednesday without Penn State football spring practice. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle from Blue White Illustrated. The light is officially at the end of the tunnel. If you tuned into Tuesday's BWI Live, it was a week from spring practice starting. Now it's just 6 days. The Nittany Lions will be back on the field under the direction of James Franklin. The 12th spring practice he will preside over in State College, and we're going to get into a little bit of that today when we look at the position groups on offense and where things stand with them. We have some other topics to get to. T. Frank, welcome to the final show of pre-spring practice. I know the season only ended like a week ago, the 2024 season, but we kicked off 2025 with winter workouts about 2 or 3 weeks ago now. Those are continuing this week after spring break, and it's about time for the pads to come back on. Fun time of year.
Yeah, and by the way, tell your friends. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, the place to go to get all the information. But, of course, here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, we took spring break off as well. But I've noticed throughout the time I've done this that people, the blue-white game sneaks up on you. Spring practice sneaks up on you because, like, there's not the same stuff going on around it, but it is absolutely critical to Penn State's development and their progress through next year. And now a lot of the stuff that James Franklin is going to say is there are no positional battle winners so that nobody goes into the transfer portal, but there will be absolutely going to be information and conversation and intrigue. And we're going to talk about all of it here on the YouTube channel. So make sure you tell your friends that we're back and that spring practice is back next week. With that in mind, I love this thing that during the season, press conferences are on Monday. We adjust our schedule to accommodate that. We used to be live on Mondays. Now we're live on Tuesdays. But in the offseason, they switch back, and it's press conferences on Tuesdays. So we'll be live on Mondays. I'm sorry. I can't control this. It is just what it is. We'll be live next Monday with our football show, previewing everything from James Franklin. So, Greg, not to call you a liar, but there is one more show before spring practice starts because of how all of this works. So that's
one last.
I'm trying to get ahead of it. I always forget to tell everybody about that.
Yeah, one last one with you and me anyway. T. Frank, Penn State, of course, in the latest pre-spring rankings, earning a top 5 spot, some number 1 spot, some 3, 4 is where you'll see the Nittany Lions. A lot more to get to on that front in the days ahead. But T. Frank, some news this week. We'll start with the Sports Business Journal naming Pat Kraft a finalist for Athletic Director of the Year. He is joined on that list by some pretty esteemed colleagues. Danny White from Tennessee, Iowa State's Jamie Pollard, Boise State's Jeremiah Dickey, and Vanderbilt's Candace Story Lee are the other finalists for Sports Business Journal's Athletic Director of the Year honor. The winner is going to be announced May 21st in New York City. Pat Kraft has had one heck of a year, and what I wrote about over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, T. Frank, is it's not just the on-field success, and they've had plenty of that, from the women's volleyball national championship to the college football playoff semifinal run to what some other programs have accomplished. Obviously, the wrestling team heads to the NCAA tournament this weekend. It's been a good academic year for the athletic department on the field, but off the field is where a lot of this focus, I think, for him is coming. When you talk about all of the facility work, headlined by Beaver Stadium, the start of renovation, everything that comes with that, and obviously moving the athletic department into an era, if the House settlement is approved, where NIL and player compensation will change again. This is a strong list of candidates, and I think Pat Kraft has as good a resume as any of them.
Yeah, just think about what he's gotten done. And this is not to be, this is just a list of facts and things that I wasn't even aware of that, we talk about here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. I learn as much as people watching the show sometimes when it comes to the information that Nate and Greg and Fitz all provide, and Ryan, of course. But the fact that they were trying to raise $134 million for the stadium, and they got it done what felt like very quickly. Pat Kraft got those donations. Like, you've seen more named donations. The naming of Beaver Stadium, all these things that have happened recently for Penn State football. Like, I'm not saying he's the only person responsible for that, but when you're the leader and you're setting the direction and you're tasked with completing those things, like that is leadership, right? And so all of the success on the field is kind of downstream of these things and not necessarily directly tied to Pat Kraft, but you do see a resurgence in some areas from Penn State athletics under Pat Kraft. And I think that the biggest thing, obviously, is Beaver Stadium. Just think how long we talked about they need to make a decision on Beaver Stadium. And
Right.
he made a decision. Like, they made a decision when he became athletic director. I think those are all things that speak to that this being warranted as far as being a finalist for athletic director of the year. It doesn't always have to come down to how many championships did your program win in a given year.
Yes. I think back to the facilities master plan of yesteryear and everything that went into that between now and then, before Pat Kraft came aboard and Penn State, with a lot of other people, of course, involved, finally now at a point where its renovation of the 107,000 seat structure is underway. Penn State came out of the fall at number 3 in the Learfield Director Cup standings, which is an aggregate look at how your on-field performance is going. That led to Big Ten coming out of the fall. We'll see where they shake out in the winter standings, which will be out, I would say, about in a month's time. But yeah, just a final thought on that, T. Frank. Certainly a strong list of candidates, and we'll see if he wins sometime in mid-May.
Does that mean anything significant? We always try to project forward meaning in these situations. Just a good thing for Penn State, or is there anything like tangible that happens after that? You get a trophy.
Yeah, I think anytime you're associated with the power players or the power structure of college athletics, it's obviously a good thing, right? And Pat Kraft puts himself in that group, not just with this nomination as a finalist, but obviously all the other things he's done and has been a part of. So it's just another indication of what Penn State has at the athletic director position. And, it's a good sign for Penn State, certainly. And we'll see what he can accomplish moving forward. It's not an end all be all. It's not, something to go crazy about, but certainly a recognition at the very least of what he's accomplished over the last year, which has been plentiful, even though it may be, after you think of Beaver Stadium and the national championships and the football postseason run, obviously a lot more goes into it than just that with the athletic department. And I think it's a recognition of that stuff as much as anything else.
For sure.
All right. Well, let's move on. Penn State is back in State College, as we mentioned on the Open. The Nittany Lions and the rest of the student body, of course, had spring break last week. They are now back in town, which means winter workouts resumed. It's the final week of those before the Nittany Lions start spring practice on Tuesday. That means we got a new round of winter workout winners after the 5th workout on Tuesday of the offseason. The 6th and final one comes up in tomorrow, Thursday, March 20th. And for Penn State, that's a few less, T. Frank. We heard James Franklin talk about that a little bit earlier this year, that they were going to have a few less winter workouts because of how long the regular season and postseason went in 2024 and into 2025. But the winter workouts, Warriors, I asked Xavier Gilliam earlier this year, defensive tackle for Penn State, if those matter, because I think some fans scoff at them, and maybe rightly so, because we don't know the criteria or the why of these selections. But you can certainly pick up on some trends that are interesting to going into spring practice, and I think that's where we want to start this conversation.
Yeah, so you've been following this along. You wrote the article at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You're the guy when it comes to gathering the facts and information. So what are the trends you've noticed?
Well, let's start with Elliott Washington. There's nowhere else to begin the conversation. Veteran Penn State cornerback who is vying to have a starting role in 2025, with Jalen Kimber moving on as a 5-time pick of Terry Smith as his competitor of the day at the cornerback position, which is unprecedented. It hasn't happened before. Again, not an end-all be-all, and I want to be careful about how much stock we put into these. But look, when you look at that cornerback room, we're going to rank the offense positions a little bit later and defense on another show. But when you look at that cornerback room, there's some good news and some questions heading into the spring. And I think it's fair to say Elliott Washington would, back in January, you wondered if he was going to be able to take the next step. And to me, at the very least, T. Frank, this is an indication that he is trending on the right path to have a big spring, which I think he needs and this Penn State defense needs under the direction of Jim Knowles. Yeah,
he's a guy that I think there was a moment last year after spring football where things were kind of up in the air for Elliott Washington in terms of his, I don't want to say his future with the team necessarily, but he was not trending in this particular direction. He's always been super talented. There's a reason he was committed to Alabama at one point. I do think like scheme fit and maybe some development of what they thought he was going to be and what he turned into didn't quite match. And maybe that's part of that, story there. But this isn't like a cast-off player. This is an elite athlete. His physicality, his explosiveness, you saw his strength during the winter lifting that we were able to see. He's repping 450. That's as much as Venga Ioane was doing.
Right.
That's insane. That's like the level of athlete, the explosiveness, and the way he was popping right out of that, the explosiveness out of his squat was all really impressive. So it's not necessarily a surprise, but this was not the direction he was going until probably training camp last year and then finally when he got in some games and played well against West Virginia. And there was a little bit of perception bias of maybe some passes that should have been completed that weren't into his coverage. Right. But I mean, his passer rating was sub 60 last year. I think it might have been the lowest on the team. It might have been the 50s or the 40s. I don't have it in front of me right now, but he was very good last year, even considering some of the luck that he was able to get. So building on that, I think is huge for Penn State because it gives them the flexibility to do a bunch of different things in how they want to play that cornerback position, because outside corner and the way they're going to play it in this defense, if they played a lot like what they did at Ohio State, there's some variability whether or not they play two different styles, Oklahoma State versus Ohio State the last couple of years. So he provides that flexibility to decide how you're going to play with A.J. Harris back there as well and Davian Collins. I think it's a really strong cornerback room. I know there's some questions, but these are all really positive signs.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think it's good news for Terry Smith and, again, new defensive coordinator Jim Knowles. Other repeat winners, which is notable, I went back and looked at the 2023 list, and it was a new pick at each position every single day. This year, there's a lot of repeat winners. Luke Reynolds, unsurprisingly, a guy standing out at tight end in these competitions of conditioning and things like that. And Penn State, of course, goes into, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, this will foreshadow part of our conversation later in the show. Penn State, goes into this spring practice with a question at tight end in terms of who is going to be the guy that steps up and replaces Tyler Warren. I don't want to go too far into that conversation because we're going to have it, like I said, here in a bit. But Luke Reynolds, a guy who maybe doesn't play as much as he did a year ago if Khalil Dinkins is healthy for the whole season, if Andrew Rapplier does not get hurt early. He said he was hungry for more last year, and he certainly played a lot. Maybe the stat sheet doesn't indicate it, but the snap count sheet does. And I think that this is just yet another indication of he was a highly regarded recruit and has just continued to move in the right direction since getting to campus.
I talked to him just a little bit at the freshman availability or the second year availability last month. And I just asked him, do you need to like run blocking to be a run blocker? And he said, no, you just need to be able to do it, because like he threw himself into blocks, both literally and metaphorically. He went into those things with high effort, not always great execution. Some freshman things going on there, but when he was effective, he showed a lot of promise. So it's not just the catches, it's not just the highlight reels down the field. He was doing a lot of dirty work with Khalil Dinkins when they went into 3 tight end sets, and I think that's a really promising sign that he shows what we didn't really see from him on tape in high school. And it seemed like he took to that even faster than a guy like Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren was not a great blocker early in his career. I remember talking to him about how it took him some time to learn how to block because you got to have an offensive lineman style mentality. And really last year was when he started to turn the corner and have some consistency. Still wasn't, super consistent, but the fact that Luke Reynolds is showing those flashes as a freshman and he is in a position where he can be a starter or, the next guy or whatever it is, and he's doing this in winter conditioning, building on all of that success last year and those gains from last year, it's hard not to be excited about Luke Reynolds and his potential.
A couple other winners from yesterday. Jackson Smolik, the pick at quarterback again from Danny O'Brien, a guy who, as we've talked about a lot on this show, was around for all of last season but was hurt at the start of it, was cleared to do some pregame workout stuff and some light practice work later in the year, but was not the number 2 quarterback we expected him to be once Bo Prabula left because he wasn't healthy enough. That went to Ethan Grunkmeyer. So fascinating backup quarterback battle coming there. Everyone loves talking about backup quarterbacks, so we will talk about that that at some point later in the show. But he got another shout out that was interesting to note as he continues to progress back from that injury. Quentin Martin with a shout out at running back, another position group where you know who the starters are, but who fills in behind them is going to be highly contested starting in spring practice. And then one other thing that jumped out to me was Kobe Howard, freshman receiver. Was the pick from Marcus Hagans, and Marcus Hagans has spread this award around to a couple of guys so far this offseason. The transfers, Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson, have been prevalent, and Kobe Howard gets his first shout out this week. So, again, receiver, 15 minutes in, we get to it. But, I think that for Penn State, it's a matter of not what these guys are doing in the winter, even though that's really important. It's a matter of, obviously, what they do in the spring and summer. But really, all told, it's what they do on the field in the fall once we get to that point.
Yeah, and I just think it's important that Kobe Howard is there and he's participating and he's in some way standing out. And so all of those things are positive signs. These are all it's just evidence, it's check marks on the way to the final answer.
Right.
And this is the part that I'm always interested in, is like there is one camp of people that will say we can't know until we know for certain, right? Until we actually know. And then there's the people that want to jump to conclusions because one thing happens, then it's a sign of the future. And it really is just two sides of the same coin of like, when do we have enough information to make a reasonable projection into the future? It's not now, but we are building that list of information for some of these young players to take a step if they have the opportunity to do that. And Kobe Howard has the opportunity to do that because everyone in that receiver room has that opportunity. So it's good. But I don't think we're there yet. We'll get a big answer in a week or so when they start spring football,
which is what everyone's looking forward to. So one more winter workout to go for Penn State. That'll be on Thursday. And then the Nittany Lions will completely transition into the spring practice prep, with that obviously starting next Tuesday. We'll have full coverage for you here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Lots of podcasts wherever you get those if you are listening via that, and also at bluewhiteillustrated.com. So stay tuned for more preview stuff on spring practice later this week and the final winter workout roundup. But so far, I think the biggest and final takeaway from me, T. Frank, is that this Penn State team is more interesting to me than some of its predecessors because, again, I mentioned it a second ago, but you have a lot of positions where you know who the guys are and you don't know who the guys are behind them. And then you have some where you are not sure who any of the guys are, and it's very fascinating to see how that will all play out. Some of them are at almost every spot, which is not typical necessarily, but there's just a lot of interesting and different questions this year, I think, compared to previous years because of what Penn State did in the retention game during the offseason.
Yeah, and I wrote about this yesterday, and this kind of previews what we're about to do. Is I started the defensive rankings for the team start heading into spring football. So where we stand now with the positions, and linebacker, I think, is the only position where we genuinely don't know who the guys are. Because there's so many guys it could be, and there's so little returning experience for that middle linebacker position. There's a lot of different ways it could go, and so we don't necessarily have the intuition. We have some guys that we think, and I would trust the reporter guys who have that information and what they're saying in that where we have the best knowledge we know. But I think Penn State's going to find out too, is what I'm trying to say. They're going to find out in spring football. Most of these positions, we know the names, and it's going to be about the depth chart coming up in a month.
Absolutely. Speaking of the depth chart, let's get into some rankings. Penn State is on the move on offense at a number of positions. There's guys coming back at most of them, starters across the board, but not everywhere. And that's where we're going to start our ranking. And this is a combination of returning production, what you've done, what you lost, what you could do, and what we will see this year. So you can call that however you want. I hate to call it, we were talking off air before the show started, I hate to call it best to worst or least to best, because it's a projection of where these guys are before the spring. And these could completely shake up by the end of the spring. But going into the spring, we're going to start with number 5 in terms of the position group that is obviously in need of the most work heading into the 2025 season.
Number 5.
It's receiver. Surprise!
Hey! We got to it. Yeah, so there's some obvious things on this, and there's some controversy coming up. And by the way, those are my general criteria that Greg put out. I wrote about these last week at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Greg, feel free to have your own top 5 as we go through this. This is just what I wrote about and my reasoning. And returning production, depth, and then projection of talent going forward. Receiver, bottom of all of those in terms of there is almost no returning production. You have some questions about the depth, I would say. Maybe you don't have questions about the depth overall, but the depth of playable players we don't know. And then, the upside, I think that's the part here where even though it's number 5, resetting this room was something I think they needed to do. And that probably became clear to people midway through last season. But there was this hope that development would happen, the light would come on, and guys would kind of turn a corner. And now it's completely new players. I do think that from a certain perspective, Devontae Ross, Kyron Hudson provide a more adaptable skill set between the two, potentially, in this offense and what Andy Kotelnicki wants, and I think what Marcus Higgins wants from his receivers. So Devontae Ross, if he can play outside and inside, move him around the formation, he can, he's 170 whatever pounds now, 175, 178, whatever he is, he's bigger than he was before. He's stronger than he was before. That's a big development because that allows a guy like Tysier Denmark to play in the slot. He can play a little bit outside. I know talking about some of that, and maybe he can play X. They have a more diverse set of skills because you had we're going to put, I'll just say it. Amari Evans is going to play in the slot. He's going to run a deep post. They're going to throw him a touchdown. That was the deep game. That was a major part of what they did with the deep ball was one player, one formation, one concept against one coverage. If you've got Kyron Hudson and Luke Reynolds and you've got Devontae Ross who can be a legitimate threat against man coverage, zone coverage, whatever, you have the opportunity for a better schematic fit overall in the receiver room. And obviously more talent in Tysier Denmark as a guy who can come in and provide, I think, some of the sandpaper they're looking for in that room. So, I'm not trying to put specifically anything on Tysier Denmark, but they need somebody to step up. And so, these are the names that we've kind of bubbled to the surface. Talking about what we just mentioned with linebacker, we know generally the names to start with here at receiver. And so I think that's a optimistic outlook for this position if you're wanting to have one of those. Can't get I don't say it can't get worse, but they have the opportunity for different.
Yes. Yeah, I might differ with you on some of these rankings, but this is not one of them. Obviously, Penn State needs help at receiver. It went out and got some. It could go get more in the spring portal window. We will have to wait and see. But those guys will be the talk of spring. They'll be the talk of the offseason. It just is the way it goes when it comes to the receiver position at Penn State in 2025. So, obvious start to our countdown of the offensive position groups, ranking them moving forward. Let's go to number 4.
Number 4.
So Penn State, as we talked about earlier in the show, T. Frank, comes into 2025 without Tyler Warren, and he takes a lot of the production clearly with him at tight end. So that's number 4 for you, tight end.
Yeah, light your pitchforks and grab your torches because tight end is number 4 on this list, and it's not going to get less controversial as we go forward. So this is kind of a symbolic reset as much as it is the reality of the room. This is a super talented room. Khalil Dinkins showed that he can do a little bit of everything over his career and has a chance to step in and be. I compared him to Brenton Strange recently, of a guy he's not going to be the fastest. He's not the biggest. He's not one of these guys that was a 5-star that walks into the room. But I think he's going to command the respect of everybody because he can block, he can catch, he can run routes, he can do it all and can be a focal point of the offense. Or Luke Reynolds can leapfrog everybody and be a number 1 tight end. It's just we don't know yet. So when you lose 60% of your offense, and that's, I'm just making up a number, but that's what it felt like. Tyler Warren, we're going to give him the ball morning, noon, and night, rain or shine, first down, third down, fourth down. On defense, we're going to get him the football. and you lose that, like you have to say like reasonably there are some questions about which one of these tight ends is going to step up. Is Andrew Rappelier going to be healthy enough to force his name into the conversation? And then do you realign the offense to take some of the emphasis away from the tight end room, because you have to prove you're worth obsessing over. And so both tight end and receiver have completely reset the number of targets that left the building. So there's the opportunity, like we talked about with the receiver, to reset who's the focal point. Players, not plays. Other positions are going to be higher on the list because of that.
In this week or this month's upcoming version of the Blue White Illustrated magazine, which you can check out subscription offers for at bluewhiteonline.com, we have a feature on the tight ends. Let me throw some numbers at you from that feature, T. Frank. With Warren moving on, Penn State is losing 81% of its tight end catches from a year ago, 84% of its tight end yards, 72% of its touchdowns, and 33% of the team's overall receiving yards from 2024. Now, that shouldn't surprise anyone who watched this last season, right? But when you put those numbers on paper, it speaks to what Penn State not only must replace, but must find a way to, figure out who is going to be the focal point, or if it's going to have one focal point, or if it's going to spread around more in 2025. So Andy Kotelnicki and his staff certainly have their work cut out for him. Ty Howe, longtime Penn State position coach, co-offensive coordinator, and Letterman has his work cut out for him. There's talent in this room. They've recruited as well as anyone. But now it's about figuring out which of those guys is going to be the one to take a step and become the number one. And then how much, I get the sense, T. Frank, we're going to see more of a pre-2024 approach at this position where there's more diversity around who's on the field. And you'll have one clear-cut guy, but I think the number of snaps for the guys behind that guy are going to come up compared to a year ago.
Yeah, and so here's the other thing. Andy Kotelnicki, the way that I understand his offense is, in the way he said it, it's the same plays packaged differently. So where's somebody lining up? Who's getting that target? Let's just take screens for an example. Tyler Warren got a lot of screens, or RPOs. I wrote about RPOs, an area where Penn State can reconfigure the offense and maybe get more productivity out of that, where they throw a couple more RPOs to wide receivers instead of to Tyler Warren, and maybe a couple of those pop off into explosive plays. So where you line up, who is there, and the personnel package. So you can run the same play out of 11, meaning 3 receivers, or 13 if you wanted to, or 21. So it depends on who's the primary target, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And they're going to determine that based on spring practice. And I agree with you. I don't think that there is right now a guy that demands the offense is built around him. Luke Reynolds could be that guy, but at this point, he is a sophomore. And so that is not a likely outcome on March 19th.
I am most fascinated by Khalil Dinkins, a guy we've heard so much about and that Penn State has said often is athletic, more athletic than you think, more talented than you may realize, and now is his time to show it. He's been behind a lot of really talented players, no fault of his own, obviously. But if all that is true, now's the time to show it. And we'll see first in spring practice if the oldest player in this tight end room is ready to take that step and become the number one. I think he probably starts the spring that way. Does he hold that job for the long haul? We'll see. But fascinating position group. And the good news, Steve Frank, as you said a minute ago, is there's plenty of depth and talent here. We know that. And it extends all the way down to the class of 2025 guys who showed up, led by Andrew Olish. And so no lack of talent for Ty Howe and Co. to work with. They just got to figure out the pecking order, which is what spring's all about. And the good news is you don't have to have a written in stone depth chart coming out of spring practice. But as we saw with receiver last year, you better have a pretty good idea of what it's going to look like, because otherwise you might get to the fall and not be thrilled with what you have. I don't expect that to be the case for Penn State at tight end, but it's something to keep an eye on this spring for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's move on to number 3 on our list of ranking the position groups on Penn State's offense.
Number 3.
T. Frank, this is where you and I may part ways. I have not decided yet. I'm going to listen to your explanation for your pick of number 3, and then we may part ways in this conversation. But for you, number 3 in the ranking of Penn State's offensive position groups is the offensive line.
So this is a stacked offense, and this is where I think a lot of people will go, what are you talking about? This offensive line is was the best unit on the team in the playoffs. And yes, that's absolutely true. There are some areas where they wallpapered over their deficiencies with some of their strengths. And I'll get to that in a minute, but let's talk about the positives. This is too low, but this is a special circumstance. I think any other year, and this unit would be number 1. But it's not this year because of some of the things that happened. So first off, let's talk about the good. Their run blocking and they generated more yards for the running backs before contact than the running backs generated after contact. So they are responsible for a lot of those explosive runs and the major step forward in Andy Kotelnicki's system that took hold in year 1 for this group. On the flip side, just looking through some of the pass blocking situational stuff, you've got not a great list of true pass set situations. So a true pass set is just what's the down and distance? Does the defense know you're about to throw the football? And in obvious passing situations, another way to put it, Penn State's offensive line surrendered 8 sacks of Drew Aller. They surrendered 83 pressures. And that's a lot. It's not a great overall. I think Venga Ioane was probably the best overall player, but even Anthony Donko wasn't great in these situations. Now, part of that, he was playing injured, but he's still a guy that he played as a redshirt freshman, and was very good for 5 games and then was injured for the rest of the year. So I think there's still some things that we didn't get to see from Donko in terms of being fully healthy and where he is on that development path. He's obviously far ahead of where we expected. He is all of that. I'm not trying to take that away from him, but there are some things where it's like he was so good in one area and he was injured that we kind of overlooked the fact that the passing situation wasn't necessarily great. And Drew Aller was making up for a lot of that by evading pressure, throwing the ball away, making plays quickly. And so we can't overcredit them for the run blocking and ignore the pass protection. So this is a unit that is much better than it was, that generated the strength of the offense, but still has some areas to develop. Now, they are deep. They are talented. I expect this unit to overperform what they did last year. Some guys are coming back. Drew Shelton is going to come back, I think, healthier than last year because he was coming off an injury, didn't get to work last off season to get bigger, faster, stronger. Nolan Rucci I expect him to develop as well. So they'll have 2 tackles, regardless of what happens to Donko. Donko hopefully comes back healthy. So you've got 3 starting quality tackles. And then the interior, you're replacing 1 player, which I think all things work out well. Cooper Cousins is an upgrade in either the long term or the medium term at that right guard position, which is, just the quick and dirty on the back of the napkin here, breaking down who you think's going to be there. You're projecting Cooper Cousins to that position. Maybe some more explosiveness, even more so out of the run game, but he's a guy that also need to work on his pass protection, and we need to see that first. So, yes, the offensive line is great. They are deep. This is probably the best unit in James Franklin's tenure. There are areas for them to develop, and there's some other circumstances. It's more about the players in front of them, really, than it is about them. But if you wanted to make a case for why they're number 3, that's my case for why they're number 3.
I look at it like this. I think the first thing you said in your explanation was spot on, is that this is a stacked offense. And any way you slice these rankings, I think it's pretty clear that where tight end and receiver fit based on what comes back. And then after that, you're talking about preseason All-American candidates at the very minimum, running back and quarterback, and you might have one even on the offensive line. I can live with the offensive line here. I think I might flip your 3 and 2 around. We'll get to number 2 in just a second. But yeah, look at just responding to what you said there. The big question I have with the offensive line going into spring practice is, what is the next step for some of the younger guys? The Javen Williams, the Alex Birchmeyer, the JB Nelson's not a younger guy, but Does he find a more defined role this year? And obviously injuries have been a part of his story to some degree.
Yep.
What does Cooper Cousins do in year 2? And I think that if you're going from the perspective of being unsure of what you have after the guys who came back, then I think 3 is a fine spot to put this group. Of course, you could make that argument at a couple other spots we still have to get to as well. But at the end of the day, you hit the nail on the head. This is an offensive line that should, by all measurements of both data and what we've seen so far on film from these guys that come back, it should be one of the best offensive lines, not just Penn State at Penn State, but just in the Big Ten and the nation in general. There's no excuses this year. They got guys back they wanted to have back. They have recruited it very well. And so there's every reason for this group to be a strength. Like I could argue it was in 2024 as well, but maybe even more so this year. Time will tell, but it's a fair spot for sure.
Yeah, they struggled at certain points last year in the run game. Like, think of the Minnesota game, think of the Maryland game where they weren't able to generate a lot of push in the run game. But then they turned it on in the playoffs. And part of that, I think, is, the synergy of having 5 healthy players out there. That was a part of the story where they had guys banged up. Sal Wormley left a couple of games because kept getting poked in the eye. Just the little things last year with the offensive line. They had the depth to withstand that, where if you lost Anthony Donko, a player like Anthony Donko, I guess they did, and they lost Olufashinu at one point, and Drew Shelton stepped in, but I don't know that he stepped into the level that Nolan Rucci did. Part of that, and I wrote about this last week, is there were certain things that the offense did to help the offensive line, and so we have to take that into consideration, which is really more about 2 than it is about 3.
Let's get to number 2 on our list of Penn State offensive position group rankings.
Number 2.
If you're following along, it's not running back, and that means it's quarterback at number 2 on our list here. T. Frank, let's hear it. This is where I was very back and forth on this one as to whether quarterback should be 3 and offensive line 2 or vice versa. Let me hear your explanation for 2.
So, first off, Drew Aller is not as bad as Penn State fans think he is. He was good last year. He was a good quarterback in the first year. Is this the point
where I should turn off the comments in the chat? Sure. Is that the point we're at?
Yeah. Wobble Wobble's already said like he's out on this ranking, and I get that. That's the controversy. That's the controversy of what we're talking about here. There are things that Drew Aller did from process and maintenance of the offense to get rid of the ball and mitigate pressure from Nick Dawkins and from the right side of the offensive line, and honestly also from Drew Shelton at times. In the playoffs, he was not good. I'm not trying to defend what happened in the playoffs. There were things in the offense that changed when Anthony Donko was done for the year, where they stopped dropping back and throwing the ball on first and second down by about 10%. Again, I wrote about that this week at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, where that fed into Aller's tendencies to feel like he has to play fast. So in the playoffs, end of the season, there's a massive difference in his play style from when Anthony Donko was in there to when he was gone. Right. But here's the point. And from even that perspective, the point here is Drew Aller is a senior quarterback with NFL talent and good college production. Everyone else in the country thinks that he's a top 5 returning quarterback. Almost everybody from a national perspective has him on their list, except Penn State fans, it seems. So you have to realize what you have before we have the conversation of what he should be. But what he should be as a senior quarterback is all the things you're saying in the chat. More accurate, not missing any layups, all those things. I agree with you. The expectation this year is that is fixed. And so that's number 2. Here's the number 1 thing, though. Since NIL and the transfer portal era, since then, here are the quarterbacks by age that have been in the championship game. Starting in 2021, before it was really even a thing. I'm just being nice here to include 2021. Stetson Bennett, junior. Bryce Young, junior. Stetson Bennett in 2022, senior. TCU's Max Duggan, senior. J.J. McCarthy, a junior. Michael Penix Jr., a redshirt senior plus, I think, at that point. Will Howard, a 6th-year player. Riley Leonard, a senior. Do you see the pattern here? You have to be a veteran quarterback to make the national championship game. That's the evidence here. So the last 4 years, So if Drew Aller went to the NFL and you said, fine, see you later, thank goodness, let's just say nothing changes. It's Ethan Grunkmeyer, Jackson Smolik, one of those two. You're not in consideration for a national championship run. Aller is squarely in the middle of the reason this team is being taken seriously in January, February, and March as a national championship contender. Now, does that matter come September? No, but it does matter come January, because we don't have any evidence that freshmen are doing it right now, because football in college is getting older. Players that can stay longer, that don't have the NFL future, can plug and play on national championship teams, and now the threshold is higher. You can always break the trend. There can always be a sensational freshman on an elite team that steps in, or a sophomore and wins a national championship. That can always happen. But the evidence right now is that the guys making the national championship game or the semifinal are all veteran quarterbacks. And Penn State got theirs back. That's why he's number 2. And we expect him to take that step. And he's also good. He's not a bad quarterback.
And I think the most important thing, and I'm just reading the chat here and listening to what you're saying as well. It's not as bad as you think. But yeah, I think the key here is this. Drew Aller is definitely seen differently outside of the Penn State football world than he is inside of it. I just don't see any way to make a statement otherwise. Penn State fans, not all of them. I know some of you are in the chat or you're listening right now and weren't here for the live show, but you're thinking the same thing T. Frank's thinking. I know there's some of you that think that there's no way that he can't take the next step, that he cannot be what everyone thinks he can be. And I mean, look, I think his season last year was a bit underrated. I think he progressed from 2 years ago to this past year, his second year as a starter. I don't know how you could argue anything other than that. Did he make some mistakes? Did he miss some throws in big moments? Yeah, no doubt. Does a lot of quarterbacks do that? Of course. That's why there's only one team that wins a national championship, 2 that make it there, and 4 that get to the college football playoff semifinals. But yeah, I don't have an issue with the quarterback spot being number 2 here. You worry about the depth, right? I think that's the one.
I don't care.
All you have. I know you don't care at this point.
I personally do not care, because again, it's the Peyton Manning thing. We don't practice effed. So like Peyton Manning gets all the reps because I understand Bo Pribula came into a game last year and helped Penn State win against Wisconsin. That's what you want your backup quarterback for. Yes, I think Ethan Grunkmeyer or Jackson Smolik can do that. If Drew
Everyone forgets the pick 6 that changed that game. Everyone forgets that.
Yeah. If Drew Aller goes down for the season, forget it. Like the coaching staff, the team, they will not have that mentality. But the reality, the odds are it's over. So it's the one position I don't necessarily care about depth for in 2025, because I think the guys they have on the roster, at least the top 2, Smolik and Grunkmeyer, can get you through a game against most teams. I, again, have the expectation of watching those guys in high school, understanding their mental and physical capabilities, and projecting growth for them, because that's what they're going to get with Drew Aller not getting as many reps in spring football. I think that's a reasonable expectation.
So Penn State fans can continue to argue that, and will throughout the rest of the offseason, but I'm in line with you, T. Frank. You don't practice aspects for sure. And also, Drew Aller should probably get more respect from Penn State fans than he gets, with the obvious caveat that, yeah, there's some stuff he has to clean up and do better.
Oh, absolutely.
There is literally no question about that. And I think sometimes that gets lost in the conversation. Doesn't have to be, well, it's the internet, so it does, but doesn't have to be an either or. It can be a little bit of both. All right, let's get to number 1 on our list.
Number 1.
Receiver, number 5, pretty easy pick. Running back, number 1, pretty easy pick.
Yeah, and so this is the situation where, like, in terms of impact and what we just talked about with Drew Aller and, like, the importance of Drew Aller, there is a case that even, if you want to just throw away everything but the quarterback is the most important position in football, he could be number 1. But getting both Katron Allen and Nick Singleton back is of that level of importance. And also, this room is absolutely loaded.
Right.
So they have 7 players that could contribute this year if they were healthy and there were snaps. You've got the top 2, Katron Allen, Nick Singleton. I'm not going to belabor the point. Everyone knows what they are. They do also need to get better. These are 2 very good players that when you put on the film and you watch what the offensive line does in the run game, and then what they do making players miss, and then generating explosive plays, making their individual wrong on a play, they are not consistent there. Nick Singleton needs to break more tackles. Katron Allen needs to get more yards after his broken tackles. They need to work on that to become transcendent players of the position. But they also have a 1,000-yard running back times 2 in the backfield for this upcoming year on a team that's going to run the ball until you're bloody and have the great opportunity to. And then you've got the next duo, potentially, in Corey Smith and Quentin Martin. And sandwiched in there is Cam Wallace, who we thought was really good until he got hurt. Right. Behind those two, you've got 2 Big Ten size running backs in Jabri Wallace-Coleman and Tyke Hayes. Wallace-Coleman not on the roster yet, but Tyke Hayes came in at 6 foot, 250 pounds by the look of him. I mean, just looking at him, looked like a dude that could play in December. That's right. That's abnormal in terms of the size and the ability. So you've got, from a contribution standpoint, Tyke Hayes and Jabri Wallace-Coleman both come to Penn State with a more mature game in terms of understanding how to run, like being good at the position, and then athleticism. That'll all work itself out. So 7 players that could play. The future, the intermediate, the immediacy, everything is set right now for the Penn State running back room, and we'll see what it produces this coming year. I think for fans that want to see Quentin Martin be used as a do-it-all athlete, if we meet in the middle here, and I tell you he's going to be a jet sweep guy, he's going to get some pop passes, and he's going to run some routes, but he's a running back. Does that make everybody happy? Because I think that's a reality for this.
But no.
He could be the 3rd running back, technically. 23 personnel, but he's running around the formation. Not always in the backfield. Maybe he starts in the backfield. Maybe he's in the backfield sometime. But he's a guy that's going to be an orbit player. I think that's a great role for him. And so when we talk about the tight end receiver room and where they're all going to line up and how they're all going to get target shares, the running backs, as much as I don't like the idea of throwing to the running back, just check downs and screen passes and inefficient ways to throw the ball, I do think if you take the trickery of what they tried to do last year with Tyler Warren, and now you're giving it to a 4-4 athlete in Quentin Martin, trying to get him in space, or playing Nick Singleton off of that and allowing him to have the ball, a 4-3 athlete, like that might design more explosive plays closer to what we saw at Kansas than we've seen previously in the Penn State offense, where they were trying to bridge the gap, I think, a little bit last year.
Yeah, no doubt about all of that. Penn State running back room is tremendous. It is obviously now under the direction of Stan Drayton, with Jaywan Sider going to Notre Dame. It'll be interesting to see what more he can get out of Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. And
I'm sorry.
Also, yeah, that's okay.
Greg, scheme all receivers, even Clifford, to get open. That's the key to Aller. That's the key to every quarterback. That is the key of offense. Yes, I agree with you on that one, our seeker. You want to get your receivers open. Yeah, agreed.
Andy Kolnicki will focus on that, has focused on that this offseason. And the Penn State running back room is going to be a part of that pass game conversation, both in setting up passing opportunities and also catching passes out of the backfield. So that's the offense rankings of each position group heading into the spring. T. Frank is working on the defense over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We got a few minutes left. We're going to go a little bit shorter today. I got to catch a train to Philadelphia for the NCAA Wrestling Championships, but I know we promised some mailbag questions in the description, so I will get to those real quick, T. Frank. You want to hit both of these? Do you have one in particular you like more than the other?
Let's just hit this last one because it ties into what we're talking about now. We'll only get to Poncho 570, and I apologize to JT. I answered him on the message board, but I do think it's an interesting conversation. It even folds into tomorrow into the recruiting show. We might have a conversation about Peyton Falzone, Penn State prospect for 2026 at quarterback or tight end. Anyway, Poncho 570. What's the most intriguing spring battles taking place between what players? I think linebacker, because of what we talked about, and spoiler alert, that's my number 5 position for the defense. Wrote about that yesterday. I think the linebacker competition is going to be fascinating. So that's the place I'm going to start with, because I think that middle linebacker position, there's a lot of names and there's a lot of talent, but there's not a lot of experience, and there's not a lot of guys that go, okay, there's a veteran. Because kind of like center, you want a guy who's been around a while and understands football, not just the defense he's playing in. And so that kind of creates a problem because there aren't a lot of veterans. You might be stealing somebody from the will linebacker position. You might be stealing Keon Wiley from the slash position that exists or doesn't exist. I don't know. But that's going to tell us a lot about what they think of the situation, of who steps up. And kind of like receiver, there's the opportunity for anybody to step up. And so I think that linebacker position, I'm looking at Tamir Robinson. I think this is a big spring for him. He's got the size. He's an older player, but he's young at the position. So which one of those factors levels out his ability to compete for reps, if not starting role at that middle linebacker position? Because they did give him a lot of reps at Mike linebacker last year in cleanup duty when there was the opportunity to play him at either position in those, with Anthony Specca on the field. He was the guy that got Mike linebacker position reps more. That doesn't mean that's the way it stays, though. Specca could also be in the conversation this year as well.
Yeah, to me, taking the obvious receiver answer out of play is the defensive line. You have Denai Dennis Sutton, you have Zane Durant, and then after that, you have a lot of spots up for grabs, both starting spots and backup spots. And you have some guys who have done it, but not maybe for a full season, or maybe they've flashed here, but not in large chunks. And obviously, they've been behind some talented players. But there's just questions to me along this defensive line in terms of where Penn State is going to go up front. After those two guys. And I think that is very interesting to see how Zariah Fisher comes into this season. Obviously Smith Vilbert was to be back for a 7th season. He is no longer coming back. He's gone. You have Caleb Ortiz, a young defensive tackle. Is Alonzo Ford going to be healthy enough for spring practice, or at very least preseason camp later this year, to be in that defensive tackle mix? So you have some questions there. You have a newcomer as well. And I think that is going to be just a spot, T. Frank, where after the top two at defensive tackle and defensive end, respectively, a lot of questions to answer, and Penn State's going to spend the spring and probably some in preseason camp answering them as well.
Yeah. For as many returning players as they have, there are questions, including, I keep hammering on this. We don't know what the scheme is really going to look like, because there's a lot of options for Jim Knowles of how he's going to play defensive ends, how he's going to play safeties. The one thing I do know is there's going to be just 2 linebackers on the field. Going back to what I was saying, they will do a lot of things to make sure there are just 2 linebackers on the field, and they're using other players to make this scheme work. Now, there will be 3 linebacker packages, but this defense works best when you have a safety on the field or a nickel corner on the field.
That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle. You can join BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. New members just $1 for the first week. As spring practice ramps up, you're going to want to check that out for the latest intel, not just on the field, but also in recruiting. And as we sneak ever closer to the spring transfer portal window, we will have all that covered for you at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, where it's just $1 for the first week for new users. So be sure to check us out there. Ryan, T. Frank, and Sean are back with the recruiting show on Thursday. Be sure to follow our NCAA wrestling coverage this weekend as the Nittany Lions go for another national title this year in Philadelphia. And T. Frank, like we said at the start of the show, 6 days until Penn State football kicks off spring practice. I know you're looking forward to it. I am too.
Yeah, and good luck this weekend. Greg's going to be out there, and we're ending a little early so he can catch a train. So good luck to you. Have safe travels, and good luck to the Penn State wrestling team as they try to chase greatness once again. We'll see all that at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com later this week. So, Greg, get out of here. Talk to you later.